Hey everybody, thanks so much for joining us today. We're just going to give it one more minute. We're waiting for a couple of people to log on. I know we've got folks both on our Facebook page and live feed, as well as people on our webinar. We want to give everybody time to hop on. We'll get started in just a minute. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, I just pulled up the list of attendees, a lot of great names, a lot of our current and past clients. So thank you all for joining us.
I know, it's wonderful. Thanks again. All right, it looks like we're 4 o'clock on the dot, and we always want to be prompt for sure. So if everyone's ready, we'll go ahead and get started today. Thanks again for joining us. We've got a lot of really great content today for you all, and we've got a good kind of a group of panelists. If you want to go over to the agenda, I think I'll just kind of share with everyone what we've got in store for them today. So our panelists today, we're including Roger Lee, who's the CEO of EDCO here, and he's going to really share a lot of really great information for us. We're very grateful to have him. Brian's here as well, and then Steve Lacrosse from our team, who we haven't yet met on a webinar, but he's got a lot of good insight for us. Hi, Steve. So really what we want to do, we want to be mindful of time today because we had really great feedback from everyone that question and answer was really valuable. So we want to make sure that we give plenty of time at the end for that. And Roger's going to stay on and make sure to answer as many questions as you all have. So there's just really three main topics here. And so first of all, we're going to look from kind of a macroeconomic perspective. What are the influences and the factors that we're really seeing and kind of how those relate back to housing and business in general? And then we're going to dive deep, and Roger's going to give us some good insight, kind of boots on the ground, really good content about how Central Oregon businesses are faring and what we expect in the long run from them. And then we're going to loop back around to our niche. Both Steve and I are going to talk a little bit about how this, affects housing, what we're seeing in housing in the last 2 weeks since we last spoke, and kind of, tie this all in so that you have really good information to make, sound decisions as you moving forward in your real estate, life. So with that, there's just a couple of assumptions that we want to make sure that we share with you. If you want to go to the next slide. So a couple of things. So some of this, we're going to really, speak kind of at a macroeconomic level, and it's going to feel a little bit like we're not really recognizing, the fact that people have been significantly impacted by this, by the pandemic. And we want to make sure we kind of just state it for the record. We absolutely understand that people are hurting, and then we absolutely understand the Central Oregon economy has been affected. We recognize that. And so some of the big picture discussion points that we're talking about, we wanted to make sure that we noted that and that we keep it kind of in front of everyone and at the back of our minds as we're talking through this. We also want to make sure we're communicating that it's our intention to kind of deliver the insight as we see it so you can make a decision. It's the best, most relevant data we have right now, and you can count on us for sure that if that changes, so will we. So we will, relay the information as we see it, but we're not experts in the pandemic specifically, and we don't have a crystal ball. So those things said, with those caveats, I think I'll turn it over to Brian, if you want to share with us kind of what you've got.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you guys joining us today. So we have, I'm really happy Roger has joined us. He's an absolute powerhouse in this market, and hopefully, he'll be able to share some of his insights with us. What I want to do to get started is to take a look at the overall economy. I'm not an economist, but what we've done is spend a lot of time going to the biggest and best minds out there and try to get our heads around what's happening. So what's funny is all of a sudden, even though we're not economists, everyone is hearing about V-shaped recoveries, U-shaped recoveries, et cetera. And so I think it's relevant to talk about what type of recovery we're going to see to this recession, this economic challenge that we're seeing, and how we're going to come out of it. So as we go forward, before I get to that, I just want to take one step back, and I feel like I talk about this a lot, but for those who haven't heard me say it, it's important to remember that housing prices and housing sales are not directly correlated to the macro economy. It beats to its own drum a little bit, or marches to its own beat. And it's an interesting fact to know that 3 of the last 5 recessions, housing prices actually went up. The only one that had a significant price decline was the most recent, which was the 2008 recession, and that's the one that's living fresh in our mind. I'm not saying that housing prices never go down during a recession, but I think we need to all understand the data and accept the fact that the data doesn't support that housing recessions automatically mean correction in housing sales or housing prices. So that aside, let's get to what's happening in the market. So it might be interesting for you guys to see that we're hearing all these different terms about what type of recession we're hearing. Is it going to be a V-shaped recovery? Is it going to be a U-shaped recovery? Is it going to be a W? And now there's all these non-economic terms that people are coming out with as they're trying to grapple this economic data and figure out how it's going to recover. We're hearing things like the Nike swoosh type of recovery, kind of a down, a slow U, and then a long recovery back. But what we're seeing really rise to the top are either a V-shaped recovery or a U-shaped recovery. And we need to, talk about really what that means. So Reuters put out a poll about 2 weeks ago, and they asked 45 economists what type of recovery that they would predict to see out of this. What was interesting is that initially it was a V-shaped recovery, but they're now skewing a little bit more towards a U. But what's interesting to see, though, is that historically, U-shaped recoveries have always been defined. For decades leading up to this, U-shaped recoveries have always been defined as a slow decline and a slow incline back to the previous climax. But there was nothing slow or gentle about what we've been through the last couple of weeks, the last couple of months. So it's interesting to see. I think it more has to do with people trying to understand really how we come out of this and how the pandemic and the health science plays into it. But most importantly, out of all the economists that have any respect that are talking about how we're coming out of this, none of them are saying what is the bad word in economic recoveries as an L-shaped recovery. This is when a market falls off and then it languishes there for a long time. And this is more akin, like an L would be more akin to what we saw in 2008. It came down pretty hard and it stayed there for 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011. And nobody's talking about that around what we're seeing right now. So the good news is that everyone's seeing a recovery. It's just how it plays out and at what pace it comes around. So what I like to do is go to minds that are bigger and better than mine. And so what we did is we have a chart here of the 4 top financial institutions that we have here in the US. This is Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, and Wells Fargo. And what they're all showing, and they've got trillions of dollars on the line. They have a lot of people looking to them. They have people over in China showing they're getting a data set on kind of what happens 2 months before what happens here, et cetera. And what they're all saying, and what's reassuring to me, is that we have a fairly stable recovery coming, and it's going to come very, very rapidly. They all agreed, the data just came out for Q1 that we did have about a 5% contraction in our GDP here in Q1. They're all predicting a very strong decline in Q2. This is the roller coaster that we're on right now. We're buckled up, hands are in the car, and we're just riding this out right now. And we're feeling that kind of pit of despair. But what we're seeing is that they're all showing positive economic growth here in Q3 and Q4. And in 2021, they're all quite optimistic about the growth. And this, if we look back at, the empirical evidence, if we look back into history, this is not unusual. This is not unusual for pandemics or shocks to the system. This wasn't an economic crash that was built up from excesses in the market. This was a shock to the system. So if we look back to the 1918 Spanish flu, the Asian flu, SARS, et cetera, they all saw shocks to the system and quick recoveries like this. So these types of predictions are not out of line with historical evidence. One of the reasons people are struggling with this a little bit is because this isn't just business science. This isn't a contraction in the GDP where we can predict how businesses are going to recover. This is a business science. This is health science. This is how and when COVID will come under control. Will there be another flare-up? Will we have a plateau? Is this the hammer and the dance approach to recovery? This is social science. Once we actually get a grasp on how to deal with this, when will American consumers start consuming again? When will they go to the movies, sporting events? Will they travel again? Will they buy homes again, et cetera? So we have a lot of different factors and sciences playing into this, which make it a little bit more complicated than predicting a general, recovery to a recession. But I think we're getting some clarity on that. And what's reassuring to me is that all the major financial institutions are going to say that we're going to come out of this and we're going to come out of this quickly. So that's kind of the general economic, overlook for the nation. And what I'd like to do is go a little bit more local. And here we brought Roger Lee in today. A friend of mine, a mentor of mine, Jim Schell, calls Roger Lee the architect of the Bend business environment. I'm sure he'll shirk that title. But he sits at the absolute epicenter of economic development here in Central Oregon. And we brought him in today to kind of get his thoughts and kind of get some input on what he's seeing, boots on the ground, and how our business environment is going to react to what we're seeing. So thank you for joining us today, Roger.
Thanks, Brian. I really appreciate the opportunity. I really have a high amount of respect for the work that you do in this industry and how you do it. So hats off to you and your team. So real quickly, I would say maybe this is a story. I happened to see this in this COVID times, did some reruns on Netflix, and lo and behold, The Good, Bad, and the Ugly, Clint Eastwood was up there. So I watched it for the first time in probably 20 years. And so I think that's a good theme for this, but I'm not going to end with the ugly. So we'll change up the order and talk just a little bit about maybe what's happening on the first part of this here. So I would say the bad, certainly, we don't need me to tell you bad economic news today. It's all over the place. But for a little perspective, in February, we had about 69,000 Oregonians in the unemployment ranks and about 3.3% unemployment. We expect that today to be about 400,000 jobless, or roughly 20% of Oregon's 2 million jobs, at this point in time. So while most of our manufacturing and tech companies, the companies that EDCO works with most closely, what we call the traded sector, they've continued to operate. A number are operating at less than full capacity, have lost revenue, or are starting to experience supply chain issues. So in short, it's only a matter of time before these impacts kind of catch up with the traded sector that have really been felt in what we call the non-traded sector: retail, education, healthcare, et cetera. So because of these types of businesses were ordered to close, not all parts of the are impacted equally. Unfortunately, in our region, we're seeing higher unemployment and the higher percentage of our overall employment be impacted, as you can see from the other chart. And Brian, maybe I think it's the one prior to that. So, but we can see Deschutes there, number 3, Crook also at number 5, and Jefferson, that looks like at about number 8 or 9 on the kind of red end of the scale as far as the share of the total labor force that's been impacted by shutdowns and so forth. And that's really a function, I think, of our visitor economy, which is sized much larger than the Central Oregon area, because we have 4.5 million people visit here every year. So that creates a little bit bigger impact on that end. So we'll jump now to the ugly. Normal business cycle, there's recovery, accelerating growth, decelerating growth, and recession, kind of in that cycle that repeats itself over and over again to varying degrees. Different parts of the economy, different industries are in different places of that curve at any one point in time, which has the effect of kind of dampening the impact overall. We even have, some have shown to be counter-cyclical. So when jobs are scarce and unemployment's high, people go back to college. They go back to get a degree or an associate's degree. And so you see kind of a pickup in the higher education and other educational institutions. Well, they're all being impacted at the same time with this, being very concentrated and acute. So we're all maybe headed in the same direction largely. And that's what we feel like is, for this part of it's really going to be more the ugly part is, how does this really sort itself out after those orders are lifted and we try to get back to normal here. So the other thing I might say is that it's little known by Oregonians, but the dependency of this state on certain types of revenue. Specifically, Oregon's the most dependent state in the US on personal income taxes. And I think that's maybe the next slide there, Brian. When people are working and the coffers are full for the state, when they're unemployed, we feel disproportionately than any other state. And this particular chart shows, on the x-axis, on the horizontal axis, the share of taxes that are derived from personal income on the vertical axis. The Y is really volatility. So we're above a lot of states for volatility, and we're just heavily weighted on personal income taxes. And right now, when people are unemployed, we will feel it worse than other states. Just this week, we've seen the first announcements of state and local governments that are in budget cutting mode as they respond to sharp decline in revenue. And that chart really illustrates that there's no other state. We're kind of this outlier, and it's the green dot that says, guess who?
Yeah.
This is a chart generated by, I think it might have been created by Josh Lehrer, who actually lives here now, so state economist. So we're in for some volatility in the state, for sure. And the question comes up, but shouldn't revenue, both private and public, bounce back when COVID restrictions are lifted? Indeed, they could, but this is a shock so severe that we're seeing business failures at a rate that's super concentrated and will take time to recover from. For example, we have a number of businesses we're working with that happen to also have retail or kind of restaurant operations, and they're forecasting for their own industry or that part of the industry, up to 50% attrition rate for companies that just, about 25, 30% that don't start when things are open again. And then the balance of that really failing after they do get started, but can't, drive the revenue. So that's the bad and the ugly. So we'll go back to the good. And despite the reality of everything I've shared, some fundamentals that enabled this region to recover from the Great Recession, I think are still in place. I mean, people want to live here. They want to raise their kids here. They want to bring their businesses here. And what happened in the economic downturn a dozen years ago just made getting here much more easy and much more affordable. And so, for a variety of rates, including, higher vacancy rates, we see this kind of correction as providing opportunity for folks out there. And I would say Oregon also worth noting that Oregon happens to be among those states with the lowest per capita COVID rates. And I think that's a marketing tool we'll be using in our recruitment efforts to say, hey, this is a safe state to be in. And, combine that with the fact that you don't have the high hassle factor and you have great schools and just a general lower hassle factor than living in a big city. And from a real estate, I'll wrap up with this. I would just say that, we still have had an undersupply of housing in this market for the demand of people that want to be here. So maybe this gives us some breathing room to catch up. And I think it's also, buyers and sellers of real estate aren't looking for, immediate sale. It has to be next week. I think there'll be some patience in the market with respect to that. I've actually, my best friend is kind of in the industry, and he sees this as a real buying opportunity. So that could generally keep things moving. And the last thing I think I would say on the on the good part of this is that we have had some really success stories in our region of companies that are growing through this. Actually have seen record sales. They're going to be in a much different position competitively with smaller group of competitors in their marketplace to be able to grow when this comes out. And that includes pharmaceutical companies that could actually help to combat this in the next time around. So Brian, that's probably over my time, but I'm happy to answer questions afterward.
No, I think that's all great information. I appreciate you getting into that level of detail. In general, so you were here pre-recession, you were here post-recession, and now we stand here, in the teeth of another challenge to our economy. Could you just kind of give us a quick recap of generally what our economy looked like in the early 2000s and why it was so easily disrupted in that last recession, and where we stand today? Are we more diverse? Are we less diverse? Do we, how are we going to face this challenge, and how structurally are we different than the early 2000s?
Yeah, I'll try to answer that as quickly as possible. So we, as we went into the 2000s, we still have some serious remnants of our wood products industry here in secondary wood products, and it's building materials. A lot of it's doors and windows and moldings, that type of thing. That was a double whammy for us in the early 2000s when we had this huge, increase in construction activity and real estate activity that then just dropped off a cliff with the financial collapse. And so for construction employment, for example, we had half, going into this crisis, we had half the number of people employed in construction as we did almost in the peak before in 2007. So that's just that many more people that you know, are doing something different. And we really saw like 10 industries really get some critical mass behind them, including bioscience, which I mentioned, tech, and which is software and hardware. You know, outdoor gear and apparel has really taken off. There's just a broad variety, aviation, aerospace, that have gained some critical mass and moved forward with a variety of companies. That it was quite different, I would say, than in 2007. And those folks will be a powerhouse in helping us recover quicker this time.
Yeah, it certainly feels different to me. I mean, obviously, a lot of people are struggling. A lot of people are challenged by what's happening right now. But you know, we're talking about all these different industries that simply didn't exist 15 years ago, or were in their infancy. And it's interesting. Do you mind me putting on the quick video that I've got up here that you guys put together for Hum and how they're responding to the challenge right now?
You bet. It's a great example of how companies are pivoting.
Perfect. Here, let's go for this. Oops, let me go back here.
We were literally like a week out from launching the biggest, craziest innovation disruption to this category called Hum Kombucha Zero, which is a zero sugar, plant-based, shelf-stable, live and raw, real kombucha. Totally unprecedented, not on the market yet. We were just about to launch it. Trade shows coming up. We've got all the sweatshirts. We got, oh, it's going to be amazing. And then 2 days before the trade show got closed down. And then that's okay, because we have like all these retailers across the country that said, yes, we're so excited about the product. And then the emails started coming in of, yeah, we kind of need toilet paper more than we need kombucha. So we really like your product, but no new products right now. So you're basically on hold. So all but one retailer in the country all put us on hold. Okay, so now you have this new innovation. You're betting the farm on it, kind of. So you look at what's happening. Consumers are going online. So you go to Amazon, and we were going to launch Amazon, but not till May or June, and just with zero. But instead, in 10 days, we were able to launch Amazon with our cans. And we need some help. We need people. Deschutes, turns out that, you know, they have some breweries. They had to let go of some people. So it was a quick phone call over there to say, hey, we have 15 positions. And within a 5-day period of time, those 15 people that had lost their jobs now had new jobs. There's always a silver lining, and we could be sitting here going, man, this, oh my God, I can't believe it. All this stuff is so bad. We have this product, we have nothing to do with it. Or we can flip it around and go, how do we leverage? How do we look at what's happening now at our new reality? This crazy pandemic, I think, has changed all of us in a lot of different ways. I think that one of the ways for Hum that it's really shown us how we, show up in a way. We have a core value of optimism. It's seeing the endless possibility of goodness that exists in all the world. And my gosh, all the stuff in adversity is happening right now. To have that optimism and to be able to look at it and go, we got this. Like, we got this, is a game changer.
My goodness, do I love that. So, you know, that's a perfect example of what we were like, you know, in the early 2000s. In the early 2000s, that was Kombucha Mama. I remember those two gals selling Kombucha Mama at the farmer's market. And here they now are, an economic powerhouse that are agile enough to respond to what's happening here in 2020. Pretty exciting. So,
yeah,
well,
it's a very, very cool thing that's playing out across the region. And I've just been truly inspired by the creativity, the ingenuity, the leadership of our companies, large and small, in the traded sector, and how they've been able to figure out how to navigate this, help other businesses, you know, help the community in many cases as well, and still keep their businesses viable.
Well, great. Well, if I know you're a busy guy, if you can hang with us for some Q&A at the end, that'd be great. If not, we'll hit you up. But I think the next step is let's talk housing and let's talk Central Oregon. So I'm going to pass the mic over here to Steve and Aaron, both absolutely experts in this forum, and I'll let you guys run with it here.
Awesome, thank you. All right, let's do it. Let's talk housing. So this first slide that we're looking at is showing us the first 4 months of the year for both 2019 and 2020 so that we can compare. And these are the number of houses that were sold. So these are people that were looking 30 to 60 days prior deciding to purchase and then selling in these months. And so what we saw was an extremely strong start to the year. We saw about between 10 and 20% growth over the same time last year for the first 3 months. And then come April, we saw the number of sold homes in April. So the people that were looking in February and looking in March, we saw that drop by about 33%. So certainly a significant drop in the number of houses that were sold. And then the next slide will take us into kind of a more leading indicator, a more current market condition. So these are the number of homes that are going pending in the months. People are out looking and making offers. And so similarly, the first couple of months showed some good growth over last year, 20% over what the numbers look like for each of the first 2 months between last year and this year. And then come March, we did see a drop off of about 22%. And then April is where we saw that pretty serious drop off of 53% fewer homes actually went pending in April this year versus last year. And I did want to point out, we added the line chart to the right just to kind of show that there is an ebb and a flow to pending sales. It's a cyclical thing. You expect fewer homes to go pending over the holidays, and you expect that to increase and continue up in through the spring. And so to see fluctuations is not abnormal. You see it all through the chart. But to see that drop off that we see on the right come at this time of year is definitely something that we haven't seen in the recent years. And so it's something that's worth keeping an eye on. And I think in order to do that, we do have to talk some housing inventory and showings. And so with that, I'd love to turn it over to Erin.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. And so I think the thing that's interesting is that while we are seeing, some pending sales go down, we're still at an all-time low for inventory. And we talked about this a little bit last time and really kind of, dug in on it. But I think it's important for me to kind of be clear about it. So you either you hear this called absorption rate, sometimes inventory, sometimes months, on market of supply. And what we're really saying here is that when we say there's 3 months of supply left, which is what we're seeing in Central Oregon, that means that if no other homes came on the market and we continued going pending at the rate that we're going at, it would only be 3 months left before there's 0 homes available for buyers to buy. So I just think it's important to keep that in perspective. 3 months is a very short amount of time, and it's absolutely still kind of keeping the pressure on the prices and keeping things high, unlike that which we have seen. So in particular, if you think about if you throw out numbers, so in January, there were 791 homes available, and that sounds like a lot. So everyone says, how is that possible? And of course, supply is rampant. But then you think in context, 278 of those homes went pending that month. So just kind of interesting to keep in mind, we're still at kind of historical low level of inventory in Central Oregon. And then all the factors that we mentioned last time are still at play for sure. So one thing that I think is really relevant, and I think this is a powerful slide actually that we're starting to recognize. Now you see here, this is new listings, and this is really, kind of specifically coming from our feeder markets. So as we recognize, we have, a lot of people who are relocating into Central Oregon from our feeder markets. And so Ryan said in the last one, and he uses this line a lot that I really love, and that is, if San Francisco gets a cold, we're sick. So we really worry about that. And so we've been watching closely our feeder markets, and I think it's interesting to see. So if you recognize, that they all, Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, LA, these are kind of top feeder markets, they definitely saw a substantial decline in new listings year over year, right kind of in the, early March all the way through time period. And then you recognize that now they're starting to actually creep back up. So that's really positive for us in the long run, because ultimately, if someone is relocating from one of these feeder markets, they've got to sell their home in that market first before they can buy over here. So I think it's a really good indicator, and we're watching it closely and keep you all informed of that for sure. Now here's something that's also relevant, and we wanted to give you an update from the last time as well. So this is the showing time numbers. This is, the number of buyers who are coming in to come have a look at homes, and you can see that there was a really substantial dip, and it was what we expected to happen, and I think that it's relevant and important to look at. But if you notice, we've actually seen a strong increase since we last spoke, and I think it's really relevant. I think what we're seeing here is that there's a lot of pent-up demand, and even earlier than we expected, even earlier than kind of the lifting of quarantining, we're recognizing that people are coming back in for showings. So people are eager to start looking at those houses even before before we expected it. Yeah. And so then I think we'll just touch on this really briefly. So sales activity, we're the prices, this is kind of a lagging indicator. We just don't expect this to change much. We haven't seen much change in it. And we believe that in the long run, this will, shift some, but right now it's a little too early to tell, I'd say.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm just gonna, reiterate that point. A lot of people are coming to us and saying, Brian, where are the foreclosures? Where are the huge deals? Our price is crashing yet. And what's interesting is for the month of April, there was a 98.5% list to sale price. So that means on average for the price that was out there on the market, the average discount off the list price was 1.5%. And obviously this is a little bit of a lagging indicator, but what we're seeing is that what Aaron was talking about, we don't have the housing available to create that surplus. Like what I talked about in the last webinar, when we went into 2007, we had 14 months of inventory on the market, thousands of homes, plenty to choose from. People were desperate. They had to start dropping the price. That snowball got going. It grew bigger. Prices went down strongly. What's interesting about this is this historic shortage of housing is creating this support for this market. How this plays out, it's TBD a little bit, because we're going to have more buyers come out of the woods as soon as they can get out of their houses in the coming months. But we're also going to have sellers finally saying, hey, it's safe for me to put my house on the market. And then it's going to really be a play of, is that inventory going to outstrip buyer demand, or is inventory, or is the buyer demand going to outstrip that inventory? It's going to be interesting to watch that one. But my belief is that we have such a historic shortage of housing that there's just going to be more of a bottom to this price, more support for pricing right now than we'd had going into the last recession.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point to build off of. Is this is evolving, right? We're looking at the data. We're looking at what the numbers look like from a statistical standpoint, and trying to figure out what will happen moving forward. But there are a lot of variables, and we truly just don't know. One of the things that when you get out of the data and you just start looking at maybe a little bit more of what logic would tell you or what you're hearing, we're talking to our clients who a lot of them are out of town. And they bring up something that Roger mentioned earlier, which is that allure of a place like Bend is even more appealing now than it ever was. And so, we pulled up a couple of these articles here. They speak to a couple of the reasons of why that might be. And so, Brian, if you flip to the next slide, I intentionally wanted to quote someone else's words so that you didn't think that I was just, giving you my opinion. But, as we read through this, although there's no official data on people moving because of the pandemic, anecdotal evidence like scores of open rooms listed online housing boards with little reciprocation suggest an uptick in relocation since the virus entered society. And the unprecedented move to remote work has some asking whether the post-coronavirus future even needs San Francisco. And so this speaks to, what many people have done, myself included. When I moved here, I was a remote worker. Now I work in town. Now I'm a full-time employee in town, and I was able to come here because I realized I could work from home. And there are a lot of people in these cities doing the exact same thing. And so, interestingly enough, within a few days, the other coast had an article that was very similar, speaking to exodus from the city and the allure of these less densely populated areas. And so, Brian, if you flip one more, the quote from the New York Times was, "The pandemic has been particularly devastating to America's biggest cities, as the virus has found fertile ground in the density that is otherwise prized. And it comes as the country's major urban centers were already losing their appeal for many Americans. And with vast numbers of professionals now working remotely, some may consider whether they need to live in the middle of a big city after all." And so again, those outdoor spaces, that little more breathing room, places to go and have some space, I think are going to speak to people even more now than they ever have. So
Aaron, didn't you hear your relocation? Obviously you're a Central Oregon native, but tell us about your move and what prompted that when you came back from New York.
Well, it's a long story, but I lived in Manhattan during H1N1 and actually contracted H1N1. And it was in a Harlem hospital in a gurney in the hallway when I meditated on Elk Lake and decided to move back. So I am among them for sure.
Okay, good deal.
Mm-hmm.
You know what, and you know, I'm going to just jump in here because this plays into a recent article, actually, Forbes, that I helped Forbes put together, and it was talking about the migration trends that we're seeing nationwide. So even outside of what we're seeing here with COVID, the trends were already clearly pointed to the Pacific Northwest, and they were clearly pointed towards Oregon. And Roger, I'd love for you to jump in on this, but the data that I was seeing from United Van Lines is that Oregon was always #1 or #2 on a net in-migration state for the last number of years. Is that in line with what you're seeing there, Roger?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a high in-migration state for, you know, most of even the past 2 decades on a kind of on a percentage basis. And I think we will see some difficulty with migration patterns for a short period of time, but I don't think it's changing that long-term trend.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, Aaron or Steve, you want to tackle this, or do you want me to jump about on this, just talking about kind of buying power and interest rates and what we're seeing?
Sure, happy to jump in. I think this gives another bit of data and another perspective. So one of the things that we've been talking about in terms of keeping prices at a certain level and why we think that might remain the case is inventory and this lack of inventory. And so as we do expect more homes will come on the market, there are definitely people, Aaron's in charge of talking to a lot of our past clients who might be considering selling. And there are a lot of people that are kind of sitting on the sidelines and waiting to see how this plays out. But when you look at interest rates and the expectations for interest rates going forward, it speaks to that they're expected to remain in this level, whether they're at 3.3 or 3.2 or 3.5. The point is they're expected to remain at what are historically low levels. And so that will keep buyers in the market. And, you know, Brian, you had put together the calculations down on the side. If you want to go ahead and speak to that.
Yeah, and so what I want to make it real clear, I don't have an agenda here of saying buy now. Like that's absolutely not what I'm saying. But what I'm trying to be is honest with the data. And when I look at the data that we have, there's a lot of arrows pointing in the same direction in that it's relevant and it's a reasonable time to buy. And one of the bigger factors of this is our interest rates. So much of the fiscal policy that the government is using to bail the economy out right now, for lack of a better term, it's a subsidy for the housing industry, and it's going to put more pressure on prices and housing sales because of it. You know, the interest rates right now, we were already at historical lows going into this. With what the Fed is saying, hey, we have no interest rate, you know, increases in the foreseeable future. We're all of a sudden in an environment where 3.5%, maybe even 3, maybe even sub-3 interest rates are going to be the norm for 1-2 years to come. And with those type of interest rates, it makes it awfully exciting, or it may help tip that balance of buying over renting. So what I did is I pulled together a little graph. So Zillow shows our average rental amount in Bend right now around $1,900 a month. And so I said, okay, well, what does $1,900 get you in a purchase? So if we have an average purchase price in Bend of $480,000, 20% down, that gives you a $400,000 loan. A $400,000 loan at 3.5% interest rates, which is where we stand today, is an $1,800 principal and interest payment. So obviously you have some taxes and insurance on it, but we're roughly equivalent despite the high housing prices that we're dealing with. And I wish it were lower, and I wish we had more housing stock. All that aside, we're at a point where with these interest rates, it's the same payment to buy as it is to rent in Bend, Oregon. And so if we were going into this economic challenge with a high interest rate environment, 6, 7, 8%, and the cost of ownership was 30, 40, 50% more on a monthly basis than renting, I would say, guys, there's going to be some downward pressure on housing. But when I look at the low inventory, when I look at these incredibly cheap interest rates, there's no way else to describe it. I mean, it's almost free money. I mean, long-term inflation is 2-3%. And here we are, you can go get 30-year money at 3% and you get tax deductions on top of it. So with all those data points, it's another floor, you know, it's another brick of that foundation on housing prices and housing sales, whether you like it or not.
Well, and Brian, if I could just jump in really fast, I did want to just remind everyone, this, like Aaron had said, this is macro. We're talking kind of overall market, overall trends. When we have one-on-ones with our clients, there are a lot of times where we say now's not the right time. For individual decisions, it's just not the right time. It's time to wait. There might be a better opportunity either on the buy or the sell side, and it really does vary for everyone. What we're going to have is a link where you can go ahead and click. If you want to have a one-on-one with either one of us, Aaron or myself, we've got some times that are available in the schedule for next week, and you can just click and go ahead and book a strategy session and just talk through your scenario. I don't care if it's 2 years down the road that you were thinking about this and you just want to know how it plays into you. That's what we're here for. And so I thought it was a good time to mention that. But if you want to go ahead and click on the next one and talk a little more about the demographics.
Yeah, and this is one I would love Roger's opinion on as well, is kind of the macro trend. So there's one of the other things that we're going into right now in the market is household formations. And I had a whole graph on that, but I decided to take it out. I didn't want to get too wonky and too graphy. But we're at a household formation, and household ownership has been declining from about 2004 till now. And you know, it's a little cliche to say, but the millennials are done, you know, spending money on avocado toast, and they have kids at home now, and it's time to grow up and buy houses. And what we're seeing is that millennials are becoming a very big portion of the buyer pool. Nationwide, they just surpassed 50% of all home mortgage originations. And so they're a bigger force in the buying and the mortgage industry right now than baby boomers, Gen X, Gen Z, all combined. So all of a sudden we have this huge wave, this huge demographic wave that's hitting at a time when we already have a housing shortage. And all of a sudden we're seeing this need for housing. So unfortunately, I think that I wish we came into this wave of millennial homeownership with a surplus of housing. Unfortunately, I think we're hitting it at the wrong time. So I think this is going to continue to push trends, you know, unfortunately towards, you know, at least pricing support during this recession, if not long-term price increases, if that makes sense. So Aaron, do you want to, or Steve, do you want to kind of take a recap of where we're going and you know, put a close to this and answer any questions that people might have?
Yeah, we've actually got a couple of questions. Yeah, so we got a couple of questions. So Mark had asked, do the comments about sales price, supply and demand change considering various priced properties? So at the different price points, how does that change?
Steve, I can speak to that a little bit. So we definitely are seeing kind of just specifically to kind of this last 60-day period. I can speak a little bit to the kind of difference in prices. So under 500,000, what we are recognizing is that might be a little bit you know, they're less mobile. They're less, there's less movement in that specifically, both in showings and also in sales and offers on the listings that we currently have. And we think that's probably because those jobs may be at higher risk. You know, we're recognizing that that might be a demographic that maybe is more concerned about their jobs, or you know, is at home with their families and that kind of thing, and not necessarily inclined to move everyone. What we are seeing a lot of movement toward, though, is kind of our luxury or our higher end, more movement than we expected and more resilient than we had planned on. And so there have been showings, you know, almost record showings for kind of our more luxury homes. And so I think it's interesting to note the data hasn't yet caught up, so we can't really, you know, speak to specific data points, but we're watching it closely, and it's an interesting phenomenon to share, if that helps.
Yeah, you know, and I'm gonna second that motion. When we first saw the stock market correct, which was kind of the first visible reaction, the first market reaction to what we were seeing, I fully expected luxury, second home, vacation properties to be the ones that were hit first. But when the unemployment data and all the businesses started shutting down, you know, unemployment data came out and all the businesses started shutting down, I think it underlined, and then the stock market has come back, right? So what we're actually seeing is that luxury buyer is the more resilient buyer. So to answer that question, which is a good one, I actually think that housing prices on the upper end will probably see more upward pressure or more buying, more transactions than median price housing, because I think that the job insecurity is going to have a more direct play on that. And that's where, you know, because we don't have a crystal ball, I think that's going to be one of the things that really we're going to keep our eye on, because if this is a shortened unemployment period, if unemployment is high and at 15, 20% for one quarter, that's one thing. But if it goes on to 2, 3, 4 quarters and we go into 2021 with high unemployment, then that's going to kind of change this equation quite a bit. And ordinary housing, medium price housing, 2x medium price housing is going to be more effective.
Okay. And I think that speaks a little bit. There was another question earlier that I had sent a comment back to for Dakota, just asking about the different types of recoveries and the U versus the V. And I think what you just said right there, Brian, was a good point. It's the duration, right? It's the duration of that bottom, and you know, all of this data and all of the discussions about what it could lead to, and you know, Roger talking about the businesses and what we're seeing here in Bend. It really all does kind of it depends on the length of time that we are in that slowdown, how quickly we're able to come back in. And I do wonder, you know, with people using this as an opportunity to get out of cities and start something new, you do expect some people to come invest and build some new businesses here. And although we might see some existing businesses, you know, not have the same opportunities, that is a time, just like within the stock market, when people have cash and people see those opportunities, we do get that influx. So, you know, I'd be curious to just hear Roger's take on that as well, about some of these out-of-town business owners looking to, you know, instead of rebuilding in a town that they were, rebuilding somewhere else.
Yeah, we are definitely fielding surprisingly inquiries, inbound inquiries, and you know, folks that we've reached out to and are, you know, continue to follow up. It's about a 3.5-year process for a company to actually pick up and move from another location in the country with their business. And so we've definitely continued to field those now, even in this environment. And we're hearing some to say maybe this is the last straw. This is why I'm actually making this decision to move out of typically a larger metro area in the West Coast. California being the biggest, but not exclusively. We see a lot of interest out of Washington and even out of our own state.
Yeah. Great.
Roger, I have a quick question for you, if you don't mind. You were speaking earlier about kind of revenue volatility and tax structure. And specifically, I'm wondering how Oregonians might expect that to impact us, you know, and what, you know, just specifically because we're more volatile because of our style of structure. Do you have any thoughts on how we would see that, kind of the ramifications of it?
Well, that's a great question. And there's lots of implications to go along with that. You know, someone would interpret that as, okay, we should expect higher tax rates in the future because we'll be short on revenue. I think Steve's point is exactly what, you know, to the heart of the matter. And it all depends upon the duration and how much longer this persists, to how many businesses are able to survive and go on, or whether they fail and you have the kind of carnage that leaves. That's a big unknown right now. And I can tell you that our local jurisdictions in our region, Deschutes County included, where you know, Bend is the county seat, are very motivated to get the economy back open again and get people working, particularly in light of the fact that our COVID cases have been very, you know, quite modest for our population, no fatalities, and we've got a healthcare system designed to take care of folks.
And then one more, if you don't mind. It's been on my mind, and it feels a little bit like the elephant in the room, and that is that tourism is a big part of our economy, and we're definitely seeing, you know, a reduction in that. Can you speak a little bit to how it was, what part of the economy it was, you know, kind of in the 2005 era, and then what part it is now, and how that's different, and how we're kind of more resilient as we expect we are?
Sure, great question. Encourage maybe at some future point to have some of the tourism leaders here. Might be interesting to join this series as well. But I can tell you that I think they're pretty optimistic. Now, there's going to be some business losses in that sector, given what's going on and the length of the closure. But you know, it was the first industry to really come out of the Great Recession. It was, you know, it was pulling numbers when other businesses maybe hadn't kind of picked up. And I think maybe that's could happen here as well. We are a very strong drive market, and I think people are going to be more reluctant to fly for a lot of reasons, at least in this short-term period. And I think we've already seen forecasts from various travel organizations, including Travel Oregon, the state agency, that they're expecting Oregon to be quite a strong market for folks in the Western U.S. driving versus flying for their family vacations, going to a place that has had relatively low impacts as a result of COVID. And, they see that as, having a strong market coming back. And to the degree we can open our businesses that people like to frequent when they're here, brew pubs being one of those, restaurants, et cetera, I think, that will draw more people. And I think, it could be the same as we came out the last time. My personal feeling is, it could be a combination of our manufacturing and tech industry with tourism that, kind of gets us back on track.
Perfect. Well, I'll probably end it on that unless there's any other outstanding questions. Roger, I can't thank you enough for joining us, and for everyone that joined us either on Facebook or here in the webinar, especially, interacting with these polls. Thank you for being here today. And, I just want to close this with, we understand that this is a very challenging time for everybody. Their businesses are shut down, or their business that they work at is shut down. And we are here for you. I had a good conversation with a group called SOS Bend today. We're going to be promoting them. It's a really interesting way of supporting your local businesses, buying gift cards, for lack of a better term, and during this, to be used once they're reopened. But it's a good way to, keep money flowing in our local economy, and to keep those wheels turning, so that all these businesses that, Roger and his team have worked so hard to bring here are there for us, when these restrictions are lifted, and when we have a healthy and safe, community to go back into. So I'm very proud to be, a citizen here in Bend, and I think these challenging times are just, underscoring why we're here, and why we made the choice to live here, and to see the way that everybody's coming together during these times is probably one of the more endearing moments for me about this community. And I'm not sure how you guys feel about it, but this is really showing that fabric that Bend is made out of.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we'll end on that. I appreciate everyone for joining, and we will keep this going. So I just shared the results of one of your polls about what you guys would like to see in the future one. One of the things that we keep on hearing over and over again, despite the fact that we're here in a challenging economic time, building and expansion of Bend always floats to the top of what everyone wants to hear about. So I think it'd be interesting to get some of the people from the city that are talking about urban growth planning. And I think it's going to tie into this inventory crisis that keeps on coming up. And I think it also plays into Roger's world, as people bring businesses here. If housing is too expensive and there's not enough housing, they can't hire employees, it stalls out our economy. So I think this is going to be one of those things that, we should be ready to talk about here in the coming months. And we'll put that on the agenda. We're going to try to do these about every 2 weeks. During these times where data is changing so rapidly, and then we'll go back to about a once a month schedule here once we find some normalcy in our industry and in our community. So with that, thank you very much, and reach out to us anytime. We're happy to help. Take care.
Thank you.